I'm Raul Ramirez with the Catch Wrestling Alliance, and we have a very special guest, Drew Rice, purple belt with Pedigo Submission Fighting. We're here actually in Pedigo, so we'll probably show some of the murals and stuff, just so you know. But Drew here, he and I, we've rolled several times, but you also told me that you're very interested in catch wrestling, and so you've done a lot of research on it. So we're going to ask you all your thoughts about some of the differences, but welcome. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it, yeah. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, no, the first gym I went to was South Bay Jiu-Jitsu, which is run by Bob Bass, more like one of the earlier black belts, American black belts. And they have a heavy influence with a lot of catch guys that come through. So fortunately I had experience with feeling what that type of game feels like very early on in Jiu-Jitsu. So yeah, very interesting.
Great. So are you even like because when we first met, you mentioned that you'd seen some documentaries and
yeah, like For the Love of Catch. I remember seeing you in it actually, and being like, I know that guy from Pedigo Open. Yeah, no, that, and then anything from Josh Barnett, anything from Eric Paulson, like that. You know, because of being interested, coming from more of a wrestling like background, I was always looking at MMA wrestlers, and then you see, you know, like Brock Lesnar, Josh Barnett, DC, and then you see who they've trained with, and you see it, you know, eking through. And then also I'm like obsessive with jiu-jitsu, and so whether it's listening to like Sonny Brown Breakdown from Australia, he interviews a lot of guys from like Jake Shannon or Sam Preston. You just get exposed. And then also it's like, I don't know, the exciting part for me with and well, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but the exciting part for me with grappling now versus like years ago, because of so much proliferation on the internet of mixing of different styles, it's really cool to see how everything's like, you know, wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu, catch wrestling, all of it is kind of melding, and the ones that don't look in those other places and only stay in their lane are going to get left behind really quick.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because then we could talk about like the modern like no-gi game, right? Where it's like you have a lot of people. I say, like, for example, when they talk about ADCC, right? They talk about like, oh, it's a wrestling tournament, but I don't necessarily think it's exactly a wrestling tournament. But those, how you mentioned, where it's like those who are mixing wrestling more into their jiu-jitsu game, they're succeeding, or they're doing better than the person who's like, kind of staying in their lane.
Absolutely, it's the same as like if you're someone who's only used to competing at IBJJF, you're just not going to do as well at ADCC, and vice versa. Like they're completely different sports, and so trying to figure out how to mix it is interesting. And even like people that, like you're saying, it's not necessarily wrestling, like some people will say, but even people that you would associate as like just guard puller, strict jiu-jitsu types, like the Danaher Death Squad, New Wave, etc. Like those guys use a ton of judo fundamentals in like their foot sweep game. They're still doing, like, it's just not American wrestling, but it's the same. It's all grappling, and you gotta know all of it at the end of the day.
Yeah, especially if you want to succeed, right? Like, and
regardless of rule set, exactly.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Yeah. So then, so you and I, we've rolled several times over, you know, the past few months. And, so, what are some of like the differences that you found with like between like even like the standard with their teaching of Pedigo and then like the catch wrestling stuff?
Yeah, so I'd say that I think one of the things the first thing is I've trained at 3 different schools, like for an extensive, where it was like my full-time school. One of them was South Bay, so it's like an old school American run jiu-jitsu school. Then it was like a very specific, like it was an excellent school of jiu-jitsu, so it's like it's an alliance affiliate, so very Brazilian jiu-jitsu gi school, and then Pedigo. And the reason I like Pedigo the most is because of the fact that they do embrace like that wrestling heritage, and having that mix is, in my opinion, just makes you so much better. And then when rolling with like you or with Tony Hua, who I believe was a brown belt under Paulson, and then got his black belt from Bob Bass. Both of you guys, it's like it's very different. And the best way I can describe it is like with catch wrestlers, they're dangerous in positions that are not positions in jiu-jitsu. Like I know Craig Jones talks a ton in like Power Ride and Power Top and his different instructionals after working with Volk, because of working with these like Russian sambists and trying to find holes in their game for MMA. He talks a lot about non-scoring positions, and so like things like Turks, leg rides, stuff that are not inherently scoring positions because the IBJJF doesn't award them, but are actually very controlling positions. In the same way, like the way that you play Turtle is, it's very annoying because you're constantly, like you feel like you're in a dominant position, but then you get caught with stuff like that straight arm lock from back control. Yeah, it's awesome. Like, and it's actually another thing is like, I love, it's you see it a ton at the top no-gi game, like people that don't play normal seatbelt, instead they go with like the same side wrist ride and then like a half Nelson on the other side, because it makes you less vulnerable to stuff like that. But again, it's just the if you're not exploiting the holes that are created by different rule sets, then you're getting left behind.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that because especially with the whole idea of like the leg Turks and all that stuff. So I think most people who come from like the jiu-jitsu background, they're thinking about like, they're not thinking Turks, they're thinking like half guard, right?
Right.
So then they're thinking of the person on bottom being in a protective and also like a position where they can like counter in some way, and they're not necessarily thinking about what the top person can do. But in wrestling, we call like those positions a Turk, and that's how you can roll them onto their back and get better leverage. You can pin them, or you can set up other types of like counterattacks.
Exactly. And people will say like it's you'll definitely hear the phrase like anti-jiu-jitsu plenty of times, which I like that phrase, but at the same time it's like it's all, hopefully it all is recognized as jiu-jitsu longer term, because if it's not getting adopted, if what works isn't getting adopted, then it's getting watered down. So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on watching, because I know for me and other friends I know that train at specifically catch wrestling places, they'll say that watching a lot of the stuff that like Craig or the DDS have put out, that it's like, oh, it's just a lot of this is just them taking catch wrestling stuff and then rebranding it as though it's new.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a thing that happens. Like you don't necessarily see, like how you mentioned, like you have like the old school jiu-jitsu, and then when they discover kind of other techniques. It kind of happened with like 10th Planet as well, like years ago, where Eddie Bravo got a lot of like amateur wrestling techniques and made a whole system out of it. It is kind of the same thing, but I guess my point or my perspective would be, it's like they can integrate a lot of things, but they're still not like, it's still not catch wrestling exactly, right? So it's like it's there. It's in a way, I think it's in a way you can still think of it as still jiu-jitsu, like their jiu-jitsu interpretation of like wrestling or catch wrestling.
Makes sense.
So it'll still be separate. Like sometimes people will say like, well, catch wrestling is going to get enveloped into jiu-jitsu. But I think because they're still going to be doing things in a jiu-jitsu way, then it's never, like catch wrestling will never be completely enveloped. A lot of techniques will be adopted, but
of course
they're still going to be like they're two separate things.
Of course, I think because of the pin for sure. Like that's a big part of it. Like, and that's one thing I will say is like one of my favorite parts with thinking about it again. Just like I'll help teach classes at South Bay Jiu-Jitsu still, and one thing that I like is Craig and others have talked a lot about, but Craig especially with Volk recently has talked a ton about like the joking thing that Derek Lewis always says of like just stand up and jiu-jitsu doesn't work, where he's using a lot of like wrestling fundamentals of even just from folk style, where it's like stand up, fight the hands, hip heist, and it's a really good, no matter what, I think training in a mind, like most of the time in jiu-jitsu, it's like if you're training in specific rules, it's usually like you're doing a sweep pass submit drill where you're following IBJJF, points rules. That's one of the things that made me really get interested in a lot of the catch stuff, was the idea of, okay guys, we're gonna train with a pin, so it's not the same as training catch wrestling, but the idea of like, let's train with a pin to force people to be more proactive on bottom, because that's more realistic for MMA. Like, you know, if now also I'm biased because I like wrestling a lot. So like, I think that's one of the things that annoys me when it comes to jiu-jitsu rules. It's like the specifically IBJJF stuff where it's like, okay, I can jump close guard on you, but you can't slam me. You know, it's like I have to respect this position where you're, you know, completely vulnerable, absent of the rule set. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're saying it's like making it where it's like advantageous for one person, but it's not fair to block the other person from like responding in a way.
The obvious, like jumping guard is way more dangerous than getting slammed in close guard. Like I've seen way more horrific injuries one direction than the other, at least. So that's my biased opinion, but I don't like getting stuck in close guard. So
No, but also too, with what you said earlier about the whole idea with pins and stuff. Yeah, it will make you more proactive for like MMA, but even I would challenge even like people who are only doing jiu-jitsu to maybe think about trying to escape from bottom when they're pinned. I mean, there are a lot of people who are great at like doing submissions from their back. But you know, you can maybe think about getting on top, or you know, sweeping, or doing these other things besides just going for like the triangle choke or something.
Oh yeah, and or like I know when I was like a blue belt, I got good at doing the no-gi Ezekiel from bottom, and like it's just it's funny, but it's like you're pinned the whole time. If the person is not bad, you're not going to catch them in that usually.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the other thing. It's just like building up the idea in people's minds that like remembering that there's an advantage to being on top. And so no matter how good you are at playing guard, don't just do that, because essentially there are like plenty of times where say someone's doing loose passing, right? So any type of outside pass where they're not pinning your hips. It's pretty common that when people are trying to control the feet to pass, they will back up, like they'll take a step back before re-entering if they're not good at pinning the hips. And it's like, that's one thing I've started doing a ton is I just stand up anytime they do that. Because it's like literally every time they take that step back, you just block technical stand up. And it's just so weird that people who like compete in jiu-jitsu regularly are not used to like that alone. Like especially if there's someone who's a wrestler who's worked really hard to get a double leg as an example. They spend all this energy, they take you down, and then they back up for a second to reset on a guard pass. And then you stand up and then they're like, wait, that's allowed?
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's literally like, that's the basis of, you know, martial arts is like getting back to your feet in the most powerful position. And like everyone who is honest in a self-defense class will say, your best chance is to get up and run away.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can stay on your feet, or if you get taken down to get back onto your feet. Yeah.
It's super important, and it's such an underutilized skill. And that goes back to the thing that's really different with catch wrestlers is it's like, they don't pause in positions because they think they have to, because they're not playing just to that specific IBJJF usually, you know, rule set. And it shows.
Yeah, because then like a lot of times in the rule sets, you have to pause in a certain position to get the points, right?
Right, which is counterproductive to the best grappling, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah, and then what do you think about say like points versus like sub only and like no-gi?
I heavily prefer sub only, but it just depends on like the issue is obviously pushing the pace. Because you know you have scenarios where it's like Kyle Chambers and Isaac Michelle, where it went like 2 hours on who's number one, and that actually is a thing where again I think that adding in the idea of like, I don't know, you know, depending, people in jiu-jitsu would definitely have an uproar about this, but like, I think adding in the idea of the pin once past a guard, so obviously not in half guard pinned, but like side control pinned, I think if we're doing sub only, that solves a lot of those problems. Because in that match, especially like Chambers was stalling a lot, which he was doing fine. Like that's the rule set. It's fine, but it's like it's not good for competitors because you don't want to be out there for 2 hours, and it's not good for viewers because it's boring to watch that for 2 hours. If someone's like, or Gordon, the way Gordon's been doing with like Pedro Mourinho and Wagner and those where he's been going to mount, getting both their elbows above their heads and looking for smothers, like, I mean, if you're not tapping, I guess it's not a sub, but like, you're submitted, bro. Like, come on. You know what I mean? So I think that would be a good, in my opinion, and that's the thing also with, at some point I want to run a gym. That definitely is something I plan on having as like a normal training tool at minimum of doing sub-only matches with pins, because I think it's I think that solves a lot of problems. Like you have a lot of stalling and EBI rules, and then also like the starting out in spiderweb and back control, like the overemphasizing of those positions. I don't really see the reason for it. But I will say I like both of them better than the IBJJF. I probably like ADCC rules the most. But they all have their, problems.
Yeah. Personally, I really like what you're saying, and then also, I'm not a fan of points like whatsoever, just because it's like not part of catch wrestling.
Yeah, like if you pull right and we're in close guard and like old school like Dean Lester, I just fall back and go for a leg lock, and say I don't quite get it, and you come up, it's like, should you really get all of the credit when I'm the one initiating, you know what I'm saying, attacks? Yeah,
I think someone recently, I'm not sure remember who it was, but they mentioned where it's like, in soccer, you only get points for making goals. You don't get points for like corner kicks or
That's a really good, actually. That's a very good way of describing it.
Yeah, go for it.
yeah, that's a really good way. Yeah, I like that.
Okay, because basically it's like in a lot of these rule sets where you have points, it's like you're getting credit for like almost or like shots towards the goal where the goalie blocked it, but you can't get a point for that.
I think anybody who watches jiu-jitsu, I think that like I know there's like constantly the question of like what organization is better for the growth of jiu-jitsu, and it's like people like Robert Drysdale will talk about how it's like the IBJJF because they have the most competitions for amateurs, and then other people will talk about it's the ADCC because it gets the most people watching and that gets more people into the sport. I definitely lean more towards the latter of those two. I think the IBJJF is it's good that they have a lot of competitions, but at the same time I think that I know for me personally, just that exact what we're talking about, that rule set, where you have a lot of like, you get credit for almost doing something, and then, there's a lot of squirrely stuff with who gets how much credit depending on. I think that sours a lot more people on the sport than the proponents of it would be willing to admit.
Yeah, I agree.
I know for me, like the fact that at purple belt in IBJJF, even at Pans and Worlds, knee bars are not legal at purple belt. But everyone is going to try to berimbolo. Like it's like I can't toe hold or knee bar this dude. Like he is giving it to me.
Yeah, they're putting their feet in your face, basically.
And so it's teaching. Like I unironically do think that is a pretty good example of like it literally teaches worse grappling. And you're rewarded for it. Anyway, yeah.
Really great point. So, you're going to be moving away though? Are you going to be starting a new school somewhere? Or?
That's the hope. Moving with my fiance to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where it's closer to where her family is. It's halfway between my family and her family. It'll be also it'll be closer to the headquarters, Daisy Fresh, and then also we'll be about 2.5 hours from Dante Leon's gym in Toledo. So we'll definitely go check them out, and we'll see. Basically, we'll train at gyms at Grand Rapids for probably a year or two. Hopefully get my brown belt soon. I don't know how impatient I'll be, but hopefully I start in school in the next 2 years.
Okay, awesome. How can people contact you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm at DREW. _RICE, and that's probably the best way.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for taking your time to talk
Thank
to
you.
me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.